You think you're in control. You think your thoughts are yours, that the voice narrating your life belongs to something called you. But pause. Who is listening to that voice? There's a question most people never ask, not because they don't want the answer, but because they're afraid there might not be one. What is consciousness? Not in a poetic sense, not metaphorically. What is it? Biologically, experientially, spiritually, where is it located? Can you touch it? Can you measure it? Can you even prove it's real? You assume that because you feel things, hunger, pain, joy, guilt, you must be alive in some deeper sense. But what if those are just signals, just data flowing through a meat machine? Now take it further. What if someone else, who looks like you, speaks like you, mimics every behavior, feels absolutely nothing? No inner world, no reflection, no I. This is the philosophical zombie, one of the most disturbing thought experiments in human history. A being that is perfectly human in every observable way, except one. It has no consciousness. And here's the horrifying part. You can't tell who is or isn't one, not even yourself. If everything you know about being you is built on your thoughts, and if thoughts are just patterns, just noise, then what's underneath it? Now consider this. If we could upload your entire brain, all your memories, knowledge, habits, into a machine, would that machine be you? Would it feel? Would it suffer? Or would it just simulate suffering and an emotional puppet dancing for the illusion of a self? We live in a time where neuroscience is decoding your brain like a blueprint, and artificial intelligence is mimicking human expression with terrifying precision. But still, no one can explain what consciousness is. We can describe it, but not define it. So what if you've built your identity, your emotions, your relationships, your morality, on something no one truly understands? What if you are a mystery to yourself? And if that's true, if your mind hides more than it reveals, then how much of your life is real? This isn't a philosophical exercise. This is your reality, your psychology, your soul. And it's time we open the door to what your consciousness has been hiding. We assume the mind is a sanctuary, a private chamber where thoughts, feelings, and intentions form freely, untouched by outside forces. But this is one of the most dangerous assumptions we make, because modern psychology, especially the work of thinkers like Carl Jung, Daniel Dennett, and Gabor Mate, has revealed something deeply unsettling. Much of what we believe to be conscious thought is nothing more than pattern, scripts, loops, adaptations, not choices, but survival strategies. You weren't born with a stable self, you built one, and you built it inside a culture that taught you what to fear, what to chase, what to suppress, and who to pretend to be. From childhood, your brain began organizing itself around one goal: safety, not truth, not authenticity, not self-realization, just survival. You learned what earned love, what triggered rejection, what feelings needed to be hidden, even from yourself. So what you call personality may just be trauma dressed as identity. Jung referred to this as the persona, the social mask you wear to function in society. It's useful, even necessary. But here's the problem. The longer you wear the mask, the more you forget it's not your face. And beneath that mask, the shadow, the parts of you you've disowned, repressed, or exiled. Your rage, your jealousy, your grief, even your capacity for wonder, chaos, and love, all buried to protect the illusion of being acceptable. So when you say, "This is just who I am," you may be parroting what your nervous system decided was safe decades ago. Let that sink in. You aren't fully aware of your thoughts, you're barely aware of their origin. This is what philosopher David Chalmers refers to when discussing the hard problem of consciousness. We can explain how the brain reacts, we can measure what lights up, but we still can't answer why experience happens. Why does red feel red? Why does sadness hurt? Why does a melody cause tears? We know the circuitry, but not the subjectivity. Even Descartes, who declared, "I think, therefore I am," eventually admitted that consciousness was an abyss. Because thought doesn't prove existence, it only proves awareness. And awareness can be misleading. Think of how easily your mind distorts reality. You mistake memory for truth. You confuse emotional reaction for moral judgment. You believe certainty means accuracy. But every layer of consciousness is filtered through bias, culture, trauma, language, and biology. Your mind is not a window. It's a mirror maze. And here's the terrifying part. Most of what you think is you is unconscious. Jung estimated that over 90% of the psyche is unconscious. Not in the Freudian sense of repression, but in the existential sense of unknown to itself. So if 90% of you operates beneath awareness, then who's driving the car? Psychologically, this is more than metaphor. Neuroscience backs it up. Your brain often decides before you do. Milliseconds before you feel in control. Free will in this sense may be post-justified logic, not origin. Which raises a question you can't unask. Am I truly choosing or just narrating the illusion of choice? This is where the philosophical zombie haunts us. Because if all behavior can be replicated, if language, emotion, and even facial expressions can be mimicked by machines or other people without true experience, then how can you prove yourself to be conscious? You can't. You can only believe it. And here's the psychological twist. Most of us would rather believe a comforting illusion than confront an uncomfortable truth. That's why we fill silence with noise. That's why we cling to identity labels. That's why we fear stillness. Because in stillness, the mirror appears, and we're afraid of what we might see. This is where the theories of Gabor Mate are essential. He argues that much of what we call mental health is simply the adaptation to an unhealthy world. Addiction, anxiety, perfectionism, they are not flaws in consciousness. They are coping mechanisms the mind develops to survive when the soul is starving. In this view, consciousness becomes a battleground, not just between awareness and unawareness, but between who you are and who you were taught to be. And until you recognize that, you live as a stranger to yourself. A mask with a heartbeat, a ghost in a flesh suit, a self-aware machine telling itself it's more. But what if you are more? What if the very fact that you can doubt your consciousness means there's something deeper waiting to be uncovered? Because while the mind can lie, the soul cannot. It waits beneath the noise, beneath the pattern, beneath the mask. And the moment you start questioning, not just the world, but your perception of it, you begin to wake up. But beware, waking up is not comforting. It's disorienting, painful, and often irreversible. The next section of this journey will explore just how deep this disconnection goes and what your consciousness may be doing without your permission. You walk through your day believing you're awake. But what if you're not? What if you're simply functioning, responding, reacting, repeating? What if awareness, real awareness, has become so rare that you've confused survival with truth? This is the cost of unconscious living. We think of zombies as fiction, grotesque bodies stumbling around unaware. But psychologically, you may already be one. Not in appearance, not in flesh, but in function. Let me explain. Every day, your brain automates over 95% of your behavior. What you eat, what you say, how you respond when someone interrupts you. Not conscious choice, just habit, bias, and learned response. You call it personality, but much of it is just momentum. And here's the tragedy. That automation keeps you from ever meeting your real self, the person who stops before reacting, who reflects before speaking, who chooses stillness over stimulation. But modern society doesn't reward that person. It rewards speed, image, production. It doesn't want you conscious. It wants you predictable. Because predictable people buy things. They follow trends. They fill the void with dopamine instead of depth. Philosopher Byung-Chul Han calls this the society of tiredness, where people believe they're free but live in self-exploitation, always chasing improvement, always optimizing, never arriving. You scroll through curated lives. You self-edit every thought before speaking. You confuse visibility with intimacy. You're exhausted, not from doing too much, but from being too little of yourself for too long. And it numbs you. This numbness isn't an accident. It's a side effect of how we live now. A society engineered to keep you distracted from the discomfort of your own mind. You're overstimulated, under-reflected, and emotionally malnourished. Here's how it plays out. You feel lonely, so you scroll. You feel anxious, so you binge. You feel bored, so you swipe. You feel pain, so you perform. You feel empty, so you consume. And the algorithms love it, because unconscious people make excellent users. But each time you respond like this, each time you bypass reflection in favor of reaction, you reinforce the illusion. That feeling better is more urgent than becoming whole. And here's where the philosophical zombie returns. The idea was never that they exist, but that you might become one. A human operating without essence. A self so fragmented it simulates connection, simulates meaning, simulates life, but never actually touches it. That's why you can have everything: success, stability, love, and still feel nothing, because you've built a life for the mask, and masks cannot feel. Let's go deeper. Psychologically, your conscious mind is not the pilot, it's the narrator. It explains choices made before you even knew they existed. Experiments in neuroscience, like Liebert's experiments, prove this. A subject is asked to move their finger and note when they decide to do so. But brain scans show activity before the conscious decision is made. In other words, your body decides, your brain reacts, your consciousness just explains. So what does that mean for free will? Well, it means this: most of what you call choice is rationalized instinct, not freedom, familiarity. You are not driven by what you want. You are driven by what is known, even if it hurts. That's why people stay in cycles of sabotage, addiction, toxic love. It's not logic, it's recognition. The body follows what it recognizes as home, even if that home is where the pain began. And now we arrive at the darkest consequence of unconsciousness. You repeat what you don't repair. Your mind, left unexamined, will recreate the same trauma under different names. You'll call it fate. You'll call it bad luck. You'll even call it love. But it's just programming. Until you question the script. Until you see your choices not as freedom but as inherited survival patterns you've never dared to interrupt. This is why self-awareness is terrifying. Not because it's unclear, but because it's surgical. It cuts through who you think you are and shows you who you've been trained to be. This is the same principle in Jung's shadow work. The shadow isn't evil, it's unintegrated. It holds everything about you that never got permission to live. Your unmet grief, your creativity strangled by shame, your sexuality suppressed by fear, your rage masked by politeness, and the more you exile these parts of yourself, the more fragmented you become. Until eventually, you are a shell, a smiling, efficient, empty shell. This is not a metaphor. This is the root of existential depression. The feeling that life is happening, but you're not in it. You're watching from a distance. You're performing a role. And no matter what you achieve, it doesn't reach you, not deeply. That's not burnout. That's spiritual starvation. Your mind doesn't need more stimulation. It needs integration. Your consciousness doesn't need more affirmations, it needs alignment. And alignment doesn't come from manifesting or mood boards. It comes from descent into the mind, into the shadow, into the uncomfortable truth that you have been living asleep. The philosopher Alan Watts once said, "Waking up to who you are requires letting go of who you imagine yourself to be." And that letting go, that's where the real consequences begin. Because once you see that your life is built on unconscious habits, you can no longer blame others for your suffering. You are forced to take ownership, to reclaim your mind, to rebuild it piece by piece, with awareness instead of assumption. But that's the only way out. The mind, left unchecked, is a trap. But when made conscious, when seen clearly, it becomes your greatest tool, and that is the beginning of freedom. You don't escape unconsciousness by thinking your way out. You escape it by confronting the parts of yourself you were trained to ignore. This is not self-improvement. It's uprising, because to awaken, to truly awaken, is to betray the system that taught you to sleep. Let's begin where the illusion began, with the lie that you are your thoughts. You're not. You're the observer behind them. Thoughts appear, you notice them, sometimes you attach, sometimes you resist, but either way they pass. If they were truly you, you wouldn't be able to step back and witness them. So the first step in breaking free is this. Stop identifying with your thoughts. They're not sacred. They're not truth. They're just noise. This is where Stoicism, Buddhist psychology, and Jungian individuation all align. Freedom begins with awareness. Try this. The next time you feel triggered, pause. Don't react. Don't explain. Just observe. Ask, where is this coming from? Is it mine or is it inherited? Is it new or is it familiar pain repeating itself? This space between trigger and reaction, that's where your power lives. Step 2, name your patterns. You cannot heal what you cannot name. You cannot choose a new path if you're blind to the one you're stuck on. Write down the loops. Why do you chase validation? Why do you fear stillness? Why do you perform when you crave authenticity? No shame, no story, just brutal clarity. Patterns don't persist because they're powerful. They persist because they're practiced. Once you see the script, you can stop acting it out. Step 3, integrate the shadow. Jung didn't tell us to destroy our darkness. He told us to own it. Because what you exile controls you, but what you integrate transforms you. This means inviting the parts of you you've spent years avoiding, the anger you suppress to stay likable, the sadness you bury under distraction, the need for control you dress up as ambition. These aren't flaws, they're messages. Your shadow isn't trying to ruin your life, it's trying to complete it. Step 4, kill the false self. This is the identity you perform to feel safe. The overachiever, the caretaker, the cool one, the rebel, the spiritual one. None of these are you. They're armor. At one point, that armor kept you alive, but now it's suffocating you. Take it off. Yes, it will feel terrifying. Yes, you will feel naked, but underneath the performance is the person who's never been allowed to breathe. And that person doesn't need to be fixed, they need to be met. Step 5, choose presence over performance. In every interaction, you're making a choice to be real or to be impressive. One earns applause, the other earns freedom. Choose real, even when your voice shakes, even when no one claps, even when it costs you the role you've always played. Presence is not glamorous, it's not Instagrammable, but it is sacred. Step 6, protect your stillness. Stillness is where the real questions live. Who am I without the story? Who benefits from my sleep? What has my silence been protecting? You won't find these answers in noise. You won't find them in hacks or hustle. You'll find them in silence, solitude, and self-confrontation. So unplug, not as a trend, but as a ritual. Let boredom detox your mind. Let silence surface the truth. And when it gets uncomfortable, stay. Because what rises is not your enemy, it's your real life trying to return. Finally, serve something higher. No, not a god, unless that's your path. Serve truth, serve integrity, serve something that lives beyond your ego. When you live only for yourself, the mind becomes a maze. But when you align with something bigger, values, virtue, presence, the maze becomes a map. You stop trying to escape your mind and you start learning how to live with it. Not a single moment of enlightenment, not a breakthrough in a journal, but 1,000 tiny choices. To feel instead of flee, to pause instead of react, to tell the truth instead of perform. This uprising is quiet, unseen, but it is the only kind that leads to peace. Because the goal isn't to become someone else, it's to remember who you were before the world taught you to forget. So here we are. After all the theories, all the philosophy, all the questions, what remains? A truth that isn't loud, isn't complex, isn't even hidden, really. You've felt it your entire life, in the quiet moments when the noise fades, in the ache behind your eyes at 2 a.m., in the strange emptiness that lingers even after you get what you thought you wanted. It's this: you are not your thoughts, you are not your feelings, you are not the stories you inherited, the roles you performed, or the scripts you never questioned. You are the space they pass through. That space is quiet, still, watching. It doesn't chase attention. It doesn't seek validation. It simply is. And the more you return to it, the more the illusion starts to crack. The illusion that success will fulfill you, that chaos is love, that perfection is safety, that control is freedom, that numbness is peace. You've been told your whole life to look outward, to fix the surface, to polish the mask, to keep the noise going. But the way back is inward, not in a cliché way, in a raw, dismantling, sobering way. Because this return requires you to face yourself without the buffer of performance. And when you do, you realize something terrifying and beautiful. You were never asleep. You were never broken. You were never lost. You were just buried. Under roles, under expectations, under survival patterns. And what your consciousness was hiding wasn't darkness. It was truth. The kind that shatters illusions and burns away what no longer belongs. Truth that says you don't need to be anything more to be enough. You don't need to be understood to be whole. You don't need to be liked to be real. Because the self that needs those things is the self you created to survive. And now survival is no longer the goal. Awakening is. Awakening to the fact that your mind is a powerful liar, but your awareness is not. Awakening to the fact that your suffering isn't proof of failure. It's proof of your depth. Awakening to the fact that what you were taught was reality was often just programming. And now, the most radical thing you can do is not to fix yourself, but to know yourself deeply, honestly, fearlessly. That is the final rebellion. Not transformation, but return. Return to the awareness that watches your thoughts without being them. Return to the body you've dissociated from. Return to the soul that's been whispering through your anxiety, your dreams, your discomfort. This isn't the kind of truth you wear like a badge. It's the kind that humbles you. It strips you. It quiets you. Because once you see it, once you feel that spark of real awareness, you realize how asleep you've been. And that's not something you can unknow. So here's your invitation. Don't just listen to this and move on. Sit with it. Sit with the questions that made you uncomfortable. Rewatch the parts that made you shift in your seat. Notice where your mind tried to escape. That's where the work begins. And when you're ready, start again. Not with a new belief, but with a new awareness. Because your mind may still try to hide things from you. But now, you know where to look. If this video cracked something open for you, if it made you pause, reflect, or feel seen, share it with someone who's still asleep. And before you go, like the video to support the channel. Remind yourself that awakening is a choice, and you just made it. We'll see you in the next one.